The Obama administration may be the target of a lawsuit by the nation's historically black colleges and universities, or HBCUs. The potential lawsuit stems from new federal financial aid policies that hit hard at students at majority black institutions. The new policies make it more difficult for parents to get the so-called PLUS loans for their children's education. African-American students are twice as likely to use PLUS loans to pay for their college expenses. And now, a large number of black parents are ineligible. We're talking about that today with Johnny Taylor, President and CEO of the Thurgood Marshall College Fund. Johnny, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you.
Before we start, also, we did reach out to the Department of Education to have Secretary Arnie Duncan on the show and some other officials, but unfortunately, we couldn't get anybody on the show. But I'm also going to play a clip a little bit later of Secretary Duncan on the Tom Joyner Morning Show talk about this very issue. But, Johnny, set this up for us in that exactly for our listening artists, what exactly is the College Plus program?
So, overall, parents are given a package, or students who are considering college a package. It includes things like the Pell Grant if someone's eligible, state grants, Stafford loans, which are the lower loans, subsidized, some unsubsidized, and not important to know. But at the end of the day, if there's a gap between this, it costs $15,000 to attend school, and you and your parents, after all of those loans and everything, contributions from parents, can only come up with $9, then the PLUS loan is an opportunity where your parents can apply for this loan and fill the gap so that the student can attend college.
So what was changed? Was it the credit report? What was changed?
The definition of adverse credit history essentially was changed. So there's this Code of Federal Regulations, Chapter 34, and essentially it said we're going to look at two things. And by the way, that didn't change. That was always the law. The Secretary Arnie Duncan is absolutely right. The law always said that adverse credit history means one of two things. You have a lot of bad credit that occurred, bad credit history during the prior 90 days before applying for the application, or within 5 years, possessions, car possessions, bankruptcies, foreclosures, all those sorts of things can be used against you, and those are called adverse credit history. So we're going along this program. October of 2011, the government says we're no longer, for whatever reason, and that's the big issue here. October of 2011, they told us all, we're going to change these rules, or at least our interpretation or our enforcement, whatever language you want to use. But immediately last year, we saw 14,000 students who had, many of whom, who had received the Parent Plus loans in the past, become immediately ineligible.
Now, my understanding is also because, look, 90% of a lot of the budgets of HBCUs are based upon the financial aid of students.
That's right.
And so all of a sudden on some of these campuses, when 400 or 500 students didn't show up, I was told that in Morehouse they had to furlough employees.
That's right.
Because of a budget shortfall. Other universities had to dip into their reserve funds to cover the gap as well.
Worse yet, many of those schools just sent the kids home. They said, we can't go to other places. We can't furlough enough people. We can't turn off enough lights. These are just expensive. We have to send these kids home. And that was the travesty. That's what happened last year that got us all in an uproar about this.
Now, again, folks, earlier this week on the Tom Joyner Morning Show, I interviewed Secretary Duncan, and he said that they are working with parents, and in some cases, they have a system set up where some folks can call in and actually get the loan approved even in 6 minutes. Here's what he had to say.
The big thing for your listeners to understand is where young people had these loans in the past and were denied, we can absolutely reconsider them. We've reconsidered many, and if I could, I'd like to give out a phone number.
Sure.
We staff like 12 hours a day. That number is 1-800-557-7394. We also have a website, studentaid.gov. And if students or families have any questions, please call. And again, where people have had this, we've had the loans reinstalled with sometimes been 6 minutes on the phone.
Now, Johnny, you heard the whole interview of Education Secretary Arnie Duncan.
I did.
Your thoughts on what he had to say?
First of all, the Secretary did meet with us last year. He and a number of very senior officials in his administration. So I don't want to suggest that they haven't been listening to us. What we said to them, however, was what you're doing is insufficient. And we're trying to understand why. At the end of the day, you have 14,000 students, and the fact is only 1,900 reversals occurred.
Now,
1,900.
Now, critics are saying that, look, Parents are taking out enormous loans. They're not going to be able to pay them back because the Parent Plus loans don't have a cap on them. Right. And so I've read some pieces where they say that the Education Department is simply trying to bring this loan program in line with other loan programs when it comes to looking at credit history.
Then do that prospectively. You want to talk about something that is lunacy. You would let a student borrow freshman, sophomore, junior year and then call that student and say you're no longer eligible for participating in this program. So that's illogical. We have said, going forward, Mr. Secretary, we absolutely agree with you that we need to cap it. We need to look at the parents' credit history to make sure that they have a reasonable ability to repay. But we're saying, and this is the only issue here,
that if kids are in the pipeline,
if you're in the pipeline, it makes no sense. Get this. A student can borrow for 2 years $28,000 a year, so I'm $56,000 in debt, but I can't return as a junior. Well, guess what? Now you have a higher dropout rate and you have a higher default rate on those very loans. You're stacking this such that these students are not going to be able to be successful. And the institutions, at the end of the day, these HBCUs are held accountable by their graduation rates and their default rates. And these are two things that are absolutely graduation rates are going to go down, default rates are going to go up. If you take a student who is midstream, and drop them out.
Last question, will you file a lawsuit?
Well, we're going to talk about it. We really, and I don't mean to dance around this. My goal is not to get into a battle and sue the Obama administration. My goal is to sit down with the secretary, senior administrators, and work it out. If the secretary says he does not have the authority to do this, that this is congressionally mandated, then we're going to go to the CBC and others who are supportive of HBCUs, many of whom are Republicans. You take North Carolina, Congressman Burr loves HBCUs because there are 11 in his state. So we're going to sit down and say, either, Secretary, use the authority that you have under the extenuating circumstances provision, or we may need to change the legislation. But, Roland, I have to say this, and this should be an uproar for our community. If a student has invested by borrowing $50,000 or $60,000 in student debt and is a semester away in some instances, a semester away from graduating, it is absolutely absurd for us to think it makes sense to change these rules now.
All right. John Taylor, we certainly appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Folks.